Hello and good evening. Thank you for joining for tonight's dark and scary cryptid horror stories. Let us know in the comments where you are listening from and if there is a cryptid you would like me to make a story on. Now for tonight's stories, I hope you enjoy. The Hollow Head. Chapter 1. The Black Hills swallowed Dale Holloway's 18-wheeler like a mouth consuming a silver fish. The October night had pressed in around him for hours, thick and suffocating, the darkness seeming to breathe against his windshield in steady, rhythmic pulses. Dale had been driving for the better part of 3 days, Chicago to Rapid City, with a load of industrial refrigeration units that rattled and groaned in the trailer behind him. His eyes burned with the particular fatigue that comes from too much coffee and not enough sleep, the kind that makes the road ahead shimmer and dance in ways it shouldn't. He'd pulled over twice for catnaps in the past 12 hours, but the sleep hadn't helped. If anything, it had made him feel worse, dizzy, disoriented, as if he'd awakened into a dream rather than out of one. The Black Hills highway wound before him like a black ribbon, the headlights carving small pools of yellow against the absolute darkness of the surrounding forest. The radio had given up on music 30 miles back, reduced now to occasional bursts of static that sounded almost like voices, like whispers trying to form words. Dale reached for the thermos of coffee wedged between the seats. It was cold now, bitter and unpleasant, but he drank it anyway. The caffeine was all that mattered. He had another 40 miles before he could reach the truck stop outside Custer, where he planned to shower and sleep for a solid 8 hours before heading back east with a new load. 40 miles. He could do 40 miles. That's when he saw the figure standing at the side of the road. At first, Dale thought it was a signpost or a mile marker, some trick of the darkness and his fatigue. But as the truck approached, the shape moved, turned, raised an arm in the universal gesture of the hitchhiker. Dale's foot hovered over the brake before his brain could fully process what he was seeing. He didn't pick up hitchhikers. He'd made that rule 20 years ago, after a young man in Kansas had pulled a knife and taken his wallet and his dignity. Dale had been lucky to escape with his life, and the lesson had stuck. But something about this figure made him pause. Maybe it was the isolation, the oppressive darkness pressing against the truck's windows, the sense that out here, miles from the nearest town, humanity was a thin and precious thing. Or maybe it was simply that the figure looked wrong, too tall, too still, like a scarecrow that had somehow climbed down from its post and learned to gesture. Dale slowed the truck. He told himself it was safe. He was 53 years old, 6'2", and had 40 pounds on most men. He carried a tire iron beneath the seat and knew how to use it. And anyway, the figure didn't look threatening, just strange. He pulled onto the shoulder, the gravel crunching beneath the massive tires, and leaned across to roll down the passenger window. The night air rushed in, cold and smelling of pine and wet earth and something else, something sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. "Need a lift?" Dale called, his voice sounding small against the vast darkness. The figure didn't answer. It simply moved toward the truck, its steps slow and deliberate, each footfall seeming to take longer than it should. As it approached the window, Dale got his first real look at it, and something cold settled in his stomach. The hitchhiker was tall, taller than Dale by several inches, maybe 6'5" or 6'6". It wore a coat that might once have been black but was now faded to the color of old bruises, tattered at the hem, hanging open to reveal. Dale squinted, trying to make out details in the dim light from the dashboard. The coat seemed strange, wrong somehow, clinging to the figure's frame in ways that didn't make sense. But it was the hat that caught Dale's attention. A top hat, old-fashioned and absurd, sitting at a slight angle on the hitchhiker's head. It cast a shadow across the upper part of the face, obscuring the features in darkness. The lower part was visible, pale, thin lips, a sharp chin, skin that looked gray in the dashboard light. "Where you headed?" Dale asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The hitchhiker didn't speak. Instead, it began to hum. The sound was low and tuneless at first, but as Dale listened, he began to recognize the melody. An old folk song, something his grandmother used to sing. The Hangman's Lament, she called it, a song about a man who danced with the devil and found he couldn't stop. The hitchhiker's voice was strange, resonant, almost hollow, as if it were coming from somewhere far away or from deep inside a well. "I can take you to Custer," Dale said, not knowing why he was still speaking, why he hadn't rolled up the window and driven away. "Got room in the cab." The humming stopped. The hitchhiker's head tilted slightly, the hat shifting with the movement, and for just a moment Dale thought he saw eyes in the shadow beneath the brim. They reflected the dashboard light back at him, yellow, like an animal's eyes caught in headlights. Then the hitchhiker moved. It was fast, faster than something that tall and thin should have been. One moment it was outside the window, the next it was pulling open the passenger door and sliding into the seat beside Dale. The cab seemed to shrink with it inside, the presence filling the space, pressing against Dale's consciousness like a weight. The smell intensified, that sweetness, that rot, mingling now with the scent of wet fur and something else, something coppery and familiar. Blood, Dale's mind supplied the word and he pushed it away. It wasn't blood. It couldn't be blood. "I don't usually pick up hitchhikers," Dale said, pulling back onto the highway, his hands tight on the wheel. "But you looked like you needed help. Long walk to anywhere out here." The hitchhiker didn't respond. It sat perfectly still, its hands folded in its lap, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Dale glanced over, trying to get a better look at the face beneath the hat, but the angle was wrong, the shadow too deep. All he could see was the chin, the thin lips, the suggestion of a nose sharp and narrow. "So, where you coming from?" Dale asked, hating the tremor in his voice. "Not much out here but trees." "Nothing. The hitchhiker might have been carved from wood for all it moved." Dale focused on the road, the yellow lines sliding past, the trees pressing close on either side. He should have kept driving. He should have pretended he hadn't seen anything, should have let this thing stand by the roadside until dawn or until someone else stopped, someone who didn't know better. But he had stopped, and now he was trapped in this cab with something that hummed old folk songs and smelled like a charnel house. 10 miles passed, then 20. Dale's anxiety grew with each mile, his hands cramping on the wheel, his eyes flicking constantly to the passenger seat. The hitchhiker hadn't moved once, hadn't shifted or sighed or done any of the 1,000 small things that living people do. It simply sat, still as death, humming occasionally in that hollow, resonant voice. "Look," Dale finally said, his patience fraying, "if you're not going to talk, that's fine. But at least tell me where I'm dropping you. We're coming up on Custer in about 10 miles. That's as far as I'm going tonight." The humming stopped. The hitchhiker's head turned slowly, impossibly slowly, until it was looking at Dale. The hat remained tilted at the same angle, maintaining the shadow across the upper face, but now Dale could see the jaw working, the thin lips parting slightly, as if the thing were about to speak. Instead, it raised its hand. Dale's foot automatically moved toward the brake, but he stopped himself. The hand, the hitchhiker's hand, was wrong. That was the only word for it. The fingers were too long, 6 or 7 joints instead of 3, curling and uncurling in ways that fingers shouldn't be able to do. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and beneath it Dale could see dark shapes moving, writhing like worms beneath the surface. And the nails, God, the nails. They were black, thick and curved like claws, extending 2 or 3 inches from the fingertips. They clicked together softly as the fingers moved, a sound like beetles scurrying across dry wood. "What?" Dale's voice came out as a whisper. "What are you?" The hitchhiker didn't answer. Its hand remained raised, those impossible fingers dancing in the air between them, and Dale realized with a sudden, sickening clarity that the coat wasn't being worn at all. It was grown, fused to the skin beneath, the fabric and flesh indistinguishable from each other, blending together in a way that made Dale's stomach heave. He slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, tires screaming against asphalt, fishtailing slightly before coming to a halt in the middle of the empty highway. Dale's heart hammered against his ribs, his breath coming in short gasps, his eyes fixed on the thing in the passenger seat. But the seat was empty. The passenger door hung open, swaying slightly in the night breeze. The smell remained, that sweet rot, that wet fur, but the hitchhiker was gone. Dale stared at the empty seat, at the door, at the darkness beyond, trying to process what had happened. It had been there, he was sure of it. He could still see the impression in the seat cushion, could still smell its presence in the air. But it was gone, and the truck had been doing 60 miles an hour. Dale reached across and pulled the door shut, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the handle. He sat there for a long moment, the engine idling, his mind racing through possibilities. Had he imagined it? Had the fatigue finally caught up with him, conjuring a phantom from the darkness and his own fears? No, he couldn't accept that. The impression in the seat was real, the smell was real, and those hands, those impossible, terrible hands, had been the most real thing he'd ever seen. He put the truck in gear and drove the remaining miles to Custer in silence, his eyes darting constantly to the rearview mirror, expecting to see a tall figure standing in the road behind him. But the highway remained empty, the darkness unbroken, and when he finally pulled into the truck stop, Dale nearly wept with relief. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his cab, the doors locked, the windows up, a tire iron across his lap, staring at the door where the hitchhiker had sat. Sometime around 3 in the morning, he thought he heard humming, faint, distant, coming from somewhere in the woods beyond the truck stop. Old folk songs, songs about hangmen and devils and dances that never end. Dale pressed his hands against his ears and tried not to scream. Chapter 2. The morning sun brought no comfort. Dale loaded up on caffeine and adrenaline, driving the remaining miles to Rapid City in a daze, dropping off his cargo with barely a word to the receiving clerk. He should have reported what he'd seen. He should have called the police, told them about the strange hitchhiker, warned them that something was wandering the Black Hills Highway. But what would he say? That he'd picked up a ghost, a monster, a man with fingers that bent the wrong way and a coat grown into his skin. They'd think he was crazy. They'd take his license, maybe his truck, and then where would he be? So Dale said nothing. He picked up his return load, agricultural equipment bound for Indianapolis, and headed back east, taking the interstate instead of the highway, adding 2 hours to his trip but sparing himself the sight of those dark trees. He tried to convince himself it was over. A strange encounter, certainly, but isolated. Whatever that thing had been, it was behind him now, a story to tell at truck stops when the nights grew long and the other drivers wanted something to raise the hair on their necks. He almost believed it. Then he heard about the bull. It was 2 days later, at a diner outside Sioux Falls. Dale was picking at a plate of eggs that had gone cold, his eyes heavy with the sleep he still couldn't manage, when a rancher at the counter started talking to the waitress about something that had happened near Custer. "Tore the damn thing apart," the rancher was saying, his voice loud with shock and anger. "My best bull, prize winner, and they tell me it's wolves, can you believe it? Wolves. Like a wolf could snap a fence post like a twig." Dale's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "Excuse me," he said, turning on his stool. "Where did you say this happened?" The rancher looked at him, suspicious at first, then softening when he saw Dale's face, the exhaustion, the fear that Dale couldn't quite hide. "You all right, friend? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," Dale managed. "But I couldn't help overhearing. You said something tore apart your bull, near Custer." "Black Hills, yeah. My spread's about 20 miles north of town. Found him yesterday morning just shredded, like something went at him with a combine harvester." Dale set down his fork. Was there anything strange, any tracks or? The rancher laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Tracks? Yeah, there were tracks, deep ones. Too big for any wolf I've ever seen, and I've been ranching these hills for 40 years, and spaced wrong, like whatever made them was walking on stilts. Dale felt the blood drain from his face. What about the feet? Did you see claw marks? The rancher's eyes narrowed. How did you know? Between the toes, Dale continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Long claw marks like something was reaching. For a long moment the diner went silent. The rancher stared at Dale, the color draining from his own face, and when he spoke again, his voice was much quieter. You seen something, he said. It wasn't a question. Dale nodded slowly. 2 nights ago, on the highway, I picked up I don't know what it was, tall, thin, wearing an old coat and a hat. The rancher made a sound, something between a gasp and a prayer. My daughter, he said. My daughter saw something 2 nights ago too, watching from the tree line. She said it was a tall man in a hat, but, he shook his head. She said his eyes glowed like embers. Dale stood up, his legs unsteady. What's your name? Hendricks, Tom Hendricks. Mr. Hendricks, I think we need to talk, somewhere private. They moved to a booth in the corner and Dale told his story. The hitchhiker, the humming, the hands, the impossible disappearance from a moving truck. Hendricks listened with growing horror, his hands clenched around a coffee cup that had long gone cold. The tracks, Dale finished. They match what I saw, the way it moved, the way it wasn't quite human. Hendricks was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with something Dale couldn't identify. Fear, certainly, but also resignation, as if he'd always known this day would come. My grandfather told me stories, Hendricks said. Stories about the old days before the settlers came, about spirits that walked the hills wearing the skins of the dead. He said they came for the guilty, for those who'd done evil in the sight of the land, but I never thought. What? Dale leaned forward. What did he say? He called them the Taku-He, the hollow ones. They wear the clothes of their victims, he said, take their shapes, their voices, but they're never quite right, never quite complete. Dale thought of the coat, fused to the flesh, the fingers too long, too jointed, the way the thing had vanished from a moving truck. What do they want? He asked. Hendricks shook his head. I don't know. Grandfather said they were punishment, that they came when the balance was broken, when evil went unanswered. But he never said how to stop them, just that they don't stop. Once they start, they don't stop until the scales are balanced. And the bull, your daughter, are they? The bull is dead, my daughter, Hendricks' voice cracked. My daughter won't go near the woods now, she won't sleep. She keeps saying it's watching her, that it knows she saw it, that it's going to come back. Dale thought of the humming, drifting through the trees. Old songs about devils and dances. I need to see those tracks, he said. I need to understand what we're dealing with. Hendricks looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. You want to help, after what you saw, after what it did to you? It didn't hurt me, Dale said. It could have, but it didn't. It just sat there, humming, and then it was gone. Maybe that means something. Maybe I'm supposed to do something about this. Or maybe, a small voice whispered in the back of his mind, maybe it's not done with you yet. Maybe it let you go so you could lead it to others. Dale pushed the thought aside. He couldn't think that way. If this thing was real, and after 2 nights of sleepless terror he had no doubt that it was, then someone needed to stop it. Someone needed to understand it. And Dale Holloway, 53 years old, truck driver, widower, father of 2 grown children who rarely called, had nothing left to lose. I'll take you to the ranch, Hendricks said. But I warn you, what you'll see there you can't unsee. And my daughter, she's not doing well. Whatever this thing is, it's already started to take her apart, piece by piece, just by being near her. Then we'd better move fast, Dale said, before there's nothing left to save. They paid for their cold food and stepped out into the October morning. The sky was clear and blue, the air crisp and clean, and somewhere in the Black Hills, something tall and thin, and Hollow was wearing a coat made of flesh and a hat that cast shadows too deep for the sun to penetrate. Dale could feel it watching, he could feel it waiting. And somewhere in the distance, barely audible above the wind, someone was humming an old folk song about a dance that never ends. Chapter 3. The Hendricks Ranch sprawled across 300 acres of scrubland and pine forest, the main house a weathered structure that had stood against the South Dakota winds for 4 generations. As Dale followed Hendricks' pickup down the long dirt driveway, he could see the damage before they even reached the barn. Fence posts snapped and splintered, the wire fencing tangled and torn, the grass beyond stamped down by something heavy and violent. Hendricks parked beside the barn and climbed out, his face gray with exhaustion and grief. Dale joined him, his boots crunching on the gravel, and together they walked toward the pasture where the bull had been found. The smell hit them first, copper and meat, and that same sweet rot that Dale had detected in the truck cab 2 nights before. He fought the urge to gag, pressing his handkerchief against his nose as they approached the site. What remained of the bull was scattered across 50 feet of pasture. Not eaten, Dale noted with growing horror, but dismantled. The animal had been torn apart with methodical precision, pieces arranged in a pattern that might have been deliberate or might have been the random scatter of violence. Bones snapped cleanly, not gnawed. Organs removed and set aside, not consumed. And everywhere the tracks. Deep impressions in the soft earth, spaced too far apart for any natural gait. Dale measured them with his eye, 4 feet between each print, sometimes more. And the claw marks Hendricks had mentioned, gouges in the soil between what might have been toes, long furrows that spoke of reaching, grasping, tearing. "This isn't an animal," Dale said, his voice hollow. "Animals kill to eat. This is something else." "I know." Hendricks was staring at the largest piece of the bull, the rib cage stripped clean of meat, standing upright in the dirt like some macabre sculpture. "I called the sheriff yesterday. He took pictures, made a report, said he'd send it to the state, but I could see in his eyes he didn't believe me. He thinks I did this. Or that my daughter did, that she's gone crazy, that this is some kind of breakdown." "Where is your daughter now?" "Inside, sedated. The doctor gave her something to help her sleep, but she keeps waking up screaming. Says it's standing outside her window, says it's humming to her." Dale looked toward the house. A girl's face appeared briefly in an upstairs window, young, pale, dark circles under her eyes, then disappeared behind the curtain. "Has she said anything else? Anything about what it wants?" Hendricks shook his head. "Just that it's angry, that it's been waiting a long time, that someone has to pay." "Pay for what?" "I don't know, but I'm starting to think." Hendricks paused, his jaw working. "I'm starting to think this has nothing to do with us, with our family, that we're just convenient targets of opportunity." Dale thought of the highway, the lonely stretch of road where he'd picked up the hitchhiker. Had it been waiting for him specifically, or simply waiting for anyone foolish enough to stop? "I need to see the place where she saw it," Dale said. "The tree line." Hendricks led him to the eastern edge of the property, where the managed pasture gave way to wild forest. The pine trees grew thick here, their branches interlocking overhead, casting the ground in perpetual twilight. Dale could see where the grass had been disturbed, where something tall had stood for a long time, waiting. "She was fetching water from the well," Hendricks said, pointing to a hand pump 30 yards away. "Looked up and there it was, standing right here, watching her." "Did it move? Did it approach her?" "She said it took 1 step forward. Then the dog started barking. We keep 3 shepherds for the herd, and it turned and walked into the trees. But slowly," she said, "like it wasn't afraid, like it knew it could come back whenever it wanted." Dale examined the ground at the forest's edge. More tracks, deep and widely spaced, leading into the darkness. And something else, shreds of fabric caught on branches, dark and stiff with what might have been mud or might have been blood. "That coat," Dale said, pointing, "that's from its coat." Hendricks looked, then looked away, his face pale. "It's real," he whispered. "God help us, it's real." "It's real," Dale agreed. "But that doesn't mean we can't fight it." They spent the afternoon searching the property, finding more tracks, more signs of the thing's presence. Scat that smelled of rot and old iron. Claw marks on tree trunks, reaching higher than any human could reach. And once, in a clearing deep in the woods, a circle of stones arranged with careful precision, each stone painted with symbols neither man could identify. "Ritual," Dale said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's doing something out here, preparing something." "Preparing for what?" Dale didn't answer. He was staring at the center of the circle, where the pine needles had been cleared away to reveal bare earth. And in that earth, scratched with claw marks or carved with tools, a single word: debt. They returned to the house as the sun began to set, the shadows lengthening across the yard. Hendricks' wife, a thin woman named Margaret, served them coffee in the kitchen while upstairs. The sedated daughter slept fitfully, her occasional moans drifting down through the ceiling. "We need to tell the sheriff," Margaret said, her hands shaking around her cup. "We need to show him what you found, the stones, the tracks. He'll have to believe us now." "He won't," Hendricks said quietly. "You know he won't. He's already made up his mind. And even if he did believe us, what could he do? This isn't something you shoot with a gun. This isn't something you arrest." "Then what do we do?" Margaret's voice rose, edged with panic. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to come back, to take her, to take all of us." "We find someone who knows," Dale said. "Someone who understands what this thing is, where it comes from, how to stop it." "And who would that be?" Hendricks exchanged a look with Dale. "There's a man in Custer," he said slowly. "An old man, Lakota. My grandfather used to consult him about things like this. Spirits, old powers, he might be willing to talk." "Then that's where we start," Dale said, draining his coffee. "Tomorrow morning, before this thing decides it's waited long enough." That night Dale slept in the barn, too afraid to leave the ranch, too afraid to be alone. He lay on a pile of hay, his tire iron within reach, listening to the sounds of the night, the wind in the trees, the distant howl of coyotes, the occasional restless movement of the remaining cattle. Sometime around midnight he heard it. Humming. Faint, distant, coming from the woods. The same tune the hitchhiker had hummed in his truck. The hangman's lament. Dale lay frozen, his hand gripping the tire iron so tightly his knuckles ached, as the sound grew slowly louder, then faded, then grew again. It was circling the property, moving around the house, around the barn, never approaching, never retreating, just waiting, watching. The humming continued for hours. Dale didn't sleep. When the first light of dawn finally grayed the sky, the sound stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only silence and the knowledge that something out there knew they were there. That something was hungry. Chapter 4. Benjamin Black Elk was 94 years old and had lived in Custer his entire life. His house was a small cabin on the edge of town, surrounded by medicinal herbs and bundles of drying sage. When Dale and Hendricks knocked on his door that morning, he answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting for them. "I know why you're here," he said, his voice thin but clear. "I heard it last night, the singing. It's been many years since I heard the Taku-He sing." "You know what it is?" Dale asked. Black Elk stepped aside, inviting them in. The cabin was crowded with books and artifacts, old photographs, beadwork, weapons that predated the reservation era. He motioned them to sit on a worn sofa and settled into a rocking chair across from them. "I know what it was," he said. "What it has become. That is different. The Taku-He were once guardians, spirits of balance. When someone committed a great wrong against the land or the people, the Taku-He would come to set things right, to restore the balance through sacrifice." "Sacrifice," Hendricks repeated. "You mean killing." "I mean justice," Black Elk corrected. Harsh justice, yes, but justice nonetheless. The Taku-He never struck the innocent, only those who had committed evil, only those who had gone unpunished. Then why is it here? Dale leaned forward. Why is it killing cattle, terrorizing a young girl? I didn't do anything wrong. Mr. Hendricks didn't do anything wrong. Why us? Black Elk was silent for a long time, his weathered hands folded in his lap. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with sadness. Because something changed it, corrupted it. The Taku-He were never meant to linger. They came, they punished, they departed. But this one has been here for a very long time, wearing its hat, singing its songs, growing its coat from the skin of the dead. How long? Hendricks asked. Since Devil's Gulch, Black Elk said. Since the massacre. The name meant nothing to Dale, but Hendricks sucked in a sharp breath. That was, what, 1890, 1891? 1890, Black Elk confirmed. A group of settlers led by a preacher named Josiah Crane attacked a Lakota camp near Devil's Gulch. The people there were not warriors. They were women, children, the elderly. Those who couldn't flee fast enough. 23 killed. The bodies. He paused, his jaw tightening. The bodies were left unburied, left for the coyotes and the crows. That's monstrous, Dale said. It was, Black Elk agreed. And it broke something. The balance that the Taku-He maintained. It shattered. Instead of coming to punish the guilty, the Taku-He was bound to the land, twisted by the violence, by the desecration. It began to wear the clothes of the dead, to take the shape of the preacher who led the massacre. The hat, Dale whispered. The top hat, it belonged to this preacher. Josiah Crane wore a tall black hat, Black Elk said. He fancied himself a man of God, a bringer of civilization to the savage wilderness. But he was a butcher. And now the Taku-He wears his mockery, his perversion of justice forever. But that was over a century ago, Hendricks protested. Why is it still here? Why is it active now? Because the debt was never paid, Black Elk said. Crane and his men were never punished. They lived out their lives, died of old age, were buried with honors. The scales never balanced. And the Taku-He has been waiting ever since, waiting for someone to pay what is owed. But we're not them, Dale said. We're not responsible for what happened in 1890. No, Black Elk agreed. But you are here. You are present. And the Taku-He no longer distinguishes between the guilty and the innocent. It only knows that blood is owed and blood will be paid. The cabin was silent. Outside, a bird called sharply, then fell silent. Is there a way to stop it? Dale finally asked. To send it away, to break whatever binding holds it here. There might be, Black Elk said slowly. But it would be dangerous, more dangerous than you can imagine. We're already in danger, Hendricks said. My daughter, she's barely holding on, and last night I could hear it, circling our house, waiting. Black Elk nodded as if this confirmed something he already knew. The Taku-He can be bound, he said, but not destroyed, not killed. It is not alive in the way that you understand life. To bind it, you must offer it what it wants, justice, balance, a sacrifice to replace the one that was denied. A sacrifice, Dale repeated. You mean a person. I mean blood, Black Elk said. Blood freely given, blood that represents a debt paid. It doesn't have to be fatal, but it must be meaningful, it must be real. And then you must contain it. Trap it in a place where it cannot escape, where the elements can weaken it, diminish it, until the binding takes hold. How do we trap it? Dale asked. It can disappear from moving vehicles. It can move faster than anything natural. Fire, Black Elk said. The Taku-He fears fire, not because it can be burned, but because fire represents purification, the cleansing of debts. Fire will not destroy it, but it can hold it, contain it, long enough for the binding to work. A burning barn, Dale said, thinking aloud. Or a house, something we can seal it inside. Something the creature will enter willingly, Black Elk cautioned. The Taku-He is not stupid. It has had 100 years to learn patience, to learn caution. It will not walk into a trap unless the bait is irresistible. And what would be irresistible to it? Black Elk's eyes met Dale's, and in their dark depths, Dale saw 100 years of sorrow. The guilty, he said, those who carry the weight of unpunished crimes. The Taku-He was created to punish. It cannot resist the scent of guilt. Dale thought of his own life. The times he'd cut corners, told lies, hurt people who trusted him. The way he'd failed his wife in her final years, too busy on the road to hold her hand as the cancer took her. The way he'd failed his children, absent fathers raising themselves through adolescence. Was he guilty? Did he carry enough sins to bait a monster? "I'll do it," he said. "I'll be the bait." "Dale, no," Hendricks started. "It's the only way. I've seen it up close. I know what it looks like, how it moves, and Dale laughed, a bitter sound. "I'm expendable, no family waiting for me. No one who'll miss me if I don't come back." "That's not true," Hendricks said. "You have people, everyone has people." "Not like your daughter," Dale said. "She's young, she has a future. I don't mind being the worm on the hook if it means she gets to see it." Black Elk watched this exchange with ancient eyes. "There is more," he said. "The binding requires words, ancient words spoken in the old tongue. I can teach them to you, but you must be careful. One mistake and the binding will fail. The Taku-He will be free and angrier than before." "Teach me," Dale said. They spent the next 3 hours in Black Elk's cabin, learning the rituals, the words, the precise arrangements of fire and blood, and that would be necessary to bind the creature. Dale wrote everything down in a notebook, his hand cramping, his mind struggling to wrap itself around concepts that predated European colonization. The sun was high when they finally emerged, blinking in the daylight. Hendricks drove them back to the ranch, both men lost in their own thoughts. "The old barn on the west side of the property," Hendricks said as they approached. "It's abandoned, been empty for years. Stone foundation, heavy timber construction. It'll burn, but not quickly." "That's where we set the trap," Dale agreed. "But first we need bait, live bait, something it'll want to investigate." "A sheep, we keep a small flock for wool." "Not just any sheep." Dale remembered Black Elk's instructions. "We need to soak the bait in something that'll catch fire easily. Kerosene, gasoline, something that'll go up fast and hot." "And you, what about you?" "I'll be nearby, close enough to speak the binding when it enters, but hidden. It can't know I'm there until it's too late." They spent the afternoon preparing. Hendricks selected the oldest sheep, one that was nearing the end of its life anyway, and they doused its wool in kerosene, careful not to get any on the animal's skin. The fumes made them both dizzy, but they worked quickly, knowing that time was short. The barn was cleared of anything valuable, the doors rigged to close and lock from the outside, the windows boarded over. A single entrance remained, wide enough for the creature to enter but positioned so that Dale could approach unseen from the side. As the sun began to set, they positioned the sheep in the center of the barn, tied to a post but able to move enough to make noise, to struggle, to attract attention. "This isn't right," Margaret said, watching from the doorway. "Using an animal like this." "It's not right that a monster is stalking your daughter either," Dale said gently. "But we do what we must to protect the living." "The sheep is innocent." "So is your daughter. So are we all compared to what happened in 1890. But the Taku-He doesn't care about innocence anymore. It only cares about the debt." Margaret turned away, tears streaming down her face. Hendricks put an arm around her, holding her close. "Go inside," he told his wife. "Take Sarah and go to the basement. Don't come out until we come for you." "What if you don't come?" "Then run," Hendricks said, his voice steady. "Take the truck and drive. Don't stop until you reach Rapid City, and don't look back." They watched her go, then turned to face the barn and the gathering dark. "Are you ready?" Hendricks asked. "No," Dale admitted, "but I'm going to do it anyway." They took their positions. Hendricks hid behind a haystack 50 yards from the barn, a rifle in his hands. Not to kill, he knew that was impossible, but to guide, to direct, to cover Dale if things went wrong. Dale concealed himself in a ditch beside the barn's entrance, his notebook of binding words clutched in one hand, a lighter in the other. The plan was simple. Wait for the Taku-He to enter the barn, wait for it to approach the bait, then seal the doors and speak the binding. The fire would do the rest, holding the creature in place while the ancient words took hold, trapping it in the flames until it could be contained. Simple, insane, probably suicidal. But it was all they had. The sun set, the darkness deepened, and in the woods beyond the pasture something began to hum. Chapter 5. The humming grew louder as the night deepened, drifting through the trees like smoke, wrapping itself around the barn and the waiting men. Dale crouched in his ditch, his muscles screaming from the tension, his eyes fixed on the tree line where the sound seemed to originate. He could see it now, a shape moving among the pines, tall and thin, the top hat visible even in the darkness, a blacker black against the night sky. It moved slowly, deliberately, those impossibly long legs carrying it across the open ground with strides that covered 10 feet at a time. It paused at the edge of the pasture, tilting its head in a gesture that was almost bird-like. The humming stopped. For a long moment there was only silence, the breathing of the wind, the distant rustle of cattle. Then the Taku-He moved again. It approached the barn not from the front, where the open door waited, but from the side, circling the structure with slow, predatory patience. Dale held his breath, willing himself invisible, as the creature passed within 20 feet of his hiding place. He could smell it now, that sweet rot, that wet fur, mingled with something else, something that might have been pine sap or might have been blood. The creature paused again, its head turning toward the barn. The sheep inside had caught its scent, or perhaps it had caught the sheep's. It let out a bleat of pure terror, high and shrill, and the sound seemed to pull at the Taku-He like a magnet. It entered the barn. Dale waited, counting slowly to 60, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could hear the sheep screaming now, hear the rustle of that impossible coat as the creature moved inside, hear the click of those 2 long fingers against the wooden floor. He crept from his hiding place, moving as silently as his trembling legs would allow. The barn door was heavy, reinforced with iron bands, and Dale moved it with agonizing slowness, afraid to make a sound. The hinges groaned just slightly, and Dale froze. Inside, the humming resumed. The creature knew something was happening, but it didn't stop. The sheep's screams had become whimpers, then silence. Dale heaved the door shut, dropping the heavy bar into place. He'd barely turned the latch when something struck the door from the inside, a blow that shook the entire structure, that sent splinters flying from the thick oak planks. He didn't wait. He ran to the side of the barn, where he'd prepared the kindling, the kerosene-soaked rags, the trail of accelerant that would turn the old building into an inferno. His hands shook as he struck the lighter once, twice, 3 times before the flame caught. The fire raced along the prepared path, hungry, eager. Within seconds, the base of the barn was engulfed, flames licking up the walls, finding the dry timber of the roof. The heat was immediate and intense, pressing against Dale's face like a physical force. From inside came a sound unlike anything Dale had ever heard, a shriek that wasn't animal, wasn't human, but something between. Like the splitting of ancient timber, like the scream of a glacier calving into the sea. The Taku-He knew it was trapped. The creature hit the door again, and this time the wood cracked, splintering around the hinges. Dale backed away, his eyes fixed on the burning structure, watching as the flames rose higher, surrounding the barn in a wall of fire 20 feet tall. "It's working," Hendricks shouted from his position, emerging from behind the haystack. "Keep back, don't let it escape." But Dale wasn't listening. He was watching the flames, watching the way they danced and writhed, and he was realizing something terrible. The fire wasn't burning the creature. The roof of the barn had collapsed, sending sparks and embers shooting into the night sky. The walls were groaning, beginning to fall inward, and through the flames, Dale could see it, the Taku-He, standing in the center of the inferno, surrounded by fire that blackened its coat and curled its hat but didn't stop it from moving. It was looking at him. He could feel its eyes through the flames, yellow and glowing like embers, and it was laughing. The sound was worse than the shrieking, a dry, hollow sound like wind through a crypt. The creature raised its hands, those impossible fingers spread wide, and the fire seemed to part around it, as if it were walking through water instead of flame. "The binding," Hendricks screamed. "Speak the binding." Dale fumbled for his notebook, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. The words Black Elk had taught him, ancient words in a language he didn't understand, sounds that felt foreign on his tongue. He began to speak, his voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. "Taku-He, spirit of balance, hear my words." The creature stopped, its head tilted, the hat shifting with the movement, and for a moment Dale thought he saw something in its posture. Confusion, fear. "I offer blood for blood, life for life, debt for debt." He took the knife from his belt, a knife he'd sharpened that afternoon, preparing for this moment, and drew it across his palm. The pain was sharp and immediate, blood welling up and spilling down his wrist. He held the hand toward the flames, offering the sacrifice. "Let the scales be balanced, let the wrong be righted, let the dead rest." The Taku-He screamed again, but this time the sound was different, not anger but something like pain. It stumbled backward away from the offering, its coat smoking now, its hat starting to crumble at the edges. "I bind you to this place, to this moment, to this flame." The barn was fully engulfed now, a pillar of fire reaching toward the stars. The heat was unbearable, pushing Dale back step by step, but he kept speaking, kept holding his bleeding hand toward the creature. "Until the debt is paid, until the balance is restored, until the earth itself forgets your name." He threw the notebook into the flames. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The fire seemed to compress, to focus, drawing in on itself like a fist closing. The Taku-He was caught in the center, visible now through the flames, its form flickering and shifting. For just a moment Dale thought he saw something else inside the fire. A woman, young, her face twisted in fear. A child reaching out. An old man, his eyes closed in acceptance. The victims of Devil's Gulch. The ones whose clothes the Taku-He wore, whose faces it sometimes showed. Then the flames roared upward, a column of fire 50 feet tall, and when they settled back down, the barn was gone, reduced to ash and embers, and in the center where the creature had stood. Nothing. Dale fell to his knees, his hands still bleeding, his voice gone. Hendricks was beside him in an instant, wrapping his palm in a bandana, pulling him away from the dying fire. Is it gone?" Hendricks asked. "Bound," Dale whispered. I think it's bound." They waited for dawn, watching the embers cool, searching the ash for any sign of the creature. There was nothing. No bones, no remains of the sheep, no sign that anything had been there at all. Just ash and the charred foundation stones, and the faint smell of wet fur that seemed to cling to everything. When the sun finally rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they dared to approach the ruins. Dale kicked through the ash with his boot, searching for the hat. If he could find the hat, he told himself, he would know. He would know if it had worked. He found nothing, no hat, no coat, no sign of the Taku-He. "It's over," Hendricks said, his voice heavy with relief. "You did it, you actually did it." Dale wanted to believe him. He wanted to go back to Chicago, to his empty apartment, to his long hauls and his truck-stop coffee. He wanted to forget that any of this had happened, to write it off as a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and too much caffeine. But as they walked back to the house, Dale found himself looking over his shoulder, looking at the tree line, looking at the shadows. Listening for humming. Chapter 6. The celebration was subdued. Margaret prepared a meal that no one had much appetite for. Sarah, Hendrik's daughter, emerged from the basement pale and shaking but alive, and clung to her father with a desperation that made Dale's heart ache. They told her it was over, that the creature was bound, trapped, unable to harm anyone ever again. She nodded, but her eyes remained haunted, and Dale knew she didn't believe them any more than he believed himself. He stayed one more night, sleeping in the guest room, listening to the sounds of the house settling, the wind in the trees, the distant calls of night birds. He heard no humming. He told himself that was proof enough. In the morning, he packed his bag and prepared to leave. Hendricks walked him to his truck, the early sun warm on their faces. "I can never repay you," Hendricks said. "What you did, what you risked." "You don't need to repay me," Dale said. "Just take care of your family, keep them close, and if you ever hear that humming again, I'll call you." Dale nodded, climbing into the cab. He started the engine, the familiar rumble comforting after the events of the past days. "One thing," Hendricks said, leaning through the window. "The sheriff came by this morning, said he'd gotten a call from another ranch 20 miles east. Same thing. Cattle torn apart, same tracks." Dale's hands froze on the wheel. "When?" "Last night while we were dealing with ours." They stared at each other, the weight of the implication settling between them. "There could be more than one," Dale said slowly. Or we didn't trap what we thought we trapped," Hendricks finished. Dale thought of the flames, the binding, the moment when the creature had seemed to flicker and change. Had he trapped the Taku-He, or had he simply released something else? "Go," Hendricks said. "Get out of here, if it comes back, if it wants revenge." "It won't come for me," Dale said, though he didn't know why he was so certain. "It didn't want me before. I was just transportation, a way to get where it needed to go." "Then what does it want?" Dale didn't answer. He put the truck in gear and drove away, watching in the rearview mirror as Hendricks grew smaller, then disappeared. The ranch receded into the distance, the black hills rising behind it, dark and watchful. He drove east, toward the interstate, toward civilization, toward the life he'd known before. The miles passed in a blur of asphalt and pine trees, his mind replaying the events in the barn, the words of the binding, the moment when he'd thought he'd seen the faces of the dead. He was 50 miles from Custer when he saw the hat. It was sitting on the side of the road, propped against a mile marker as if waiting for someone to claim it. The tall black top hat, slightly charred at the brim, crusted with something dark that might have been mud or might have been blood. Dale didn't stop. He pressed the accelerator, speeding past, his heart hammering against his ribs. In the mirror he saw the hat recede, small and black against the gray asphalt. But he thought he saw it move, thought he saw it lift slightly, as if caught by a breeze that wasn't there. He didn't stop until he reached Rapid City, and even then he sat in the parking lot of a truck stop for an hour, shaking, unable to make himself move. It wasn't over, he knew that now. The Taku-He wasn't bound. Maybe it had never been bound. Maybe it had simply allowed them to believe they'd succeeded while it continued its work elsewhere. Or maybe, Dale thought with growing horror, maybe it had moved on, passed through the flames and emerged somewhere else, wearing new clothes, singing new songs. He thought of the other ranch, the same tracks, the same destruction, the same humming. Dale eventually drove home. He tried to resume his life, his roots, his routines. But something had changed in him, something fundamental. He saw shadows where there should be light. He heard whispers in the static of his radio. And sometimes late at night, when the miles stretched empty before him and the darkness pressed close, he thought he saw a tall figure standing by the road, wrapped in a tattered coat, its face hidden by a slouched top hat. He never stopped again, not for anyone, not for anything. And in his dreams, he heard humming. Old folk songs about hangmen and devils and dances that never end. Chapter 7. 2 weeks after the fire, the sheriff's wife found the hat on her porch. It was a Sunday morning, early, the sky just beginning to lighten. Martha Jenkins stepped outside to retrieve the newspaper and nearly tripped over something sitting on her welcome mat. She looked down, and her scream brought her husband running from the kitchen, coffee spilled down his uniform, his hand on his weapon. The hat sat there, innocent and terrible. The tall black top hat, slightly charred, crusted with dark stains, and inside, nestled in the brim where the sweatband would be, a finger. Human, male, still fresh enough that the blood hadn't fully dried, and twitching. The finger moved, curled and uncurled, as if searching for something to grasp. Martha backed away, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "Don't touch it," Sheriff Jenkins said, though he didn't know why. "Don't go near it." He called it in. The state police came, then the FBI, then specialists whose badges identified them only by number, not by name. They took the hat, the finger, the welcome mat itself. They asked questions that made no sense, about fires and rituals and words spoken in languages dead for centuries. They never found the source of the finger, never identified whose it had been. The DNA didn't match anyone in their databases, anyone reported missing, anyone who might have reason to be in South Dakota in October. The hat they sent to a laboratory in Virginia. It disappeared from the evidence locker 3 days later, and no one could explain how. The security footage showed nothing but empty hallway, a locked door, and then nothing. The finger they preserved in formaldehyde. It continued to twitch for 11 days before finally going still. When the technicians finally dissected it, they found the musculature was wrong, too many tendons, too few nerves, bone that seemed to grow and retract with each movement. They classified it, sealed the records, and warned Sheriff Jenkins that if he ever spoke of what he'd seen, he'd find himself retired early, pension forfeited, reputation destroyed. He didn't speak of it, but he dreamed of it. Every night, the hat on his porch, the finger in the brim, the slow, rhythmic twitching that seemed to beat in time with his own heart. He retired 6 months later, citing health reasons. Moved to Arizona, where the sun was bright and the nights were short and the pine forests were far away. But sometimes in the deep desert night, he thought he heard humming. Old folk songs drifting on the dry wind. And once, just once, he woke to find a top hat sitting on his nightstand, empty and waiting. He didn't scream. He'd learned that screaming did no good. He simply got in his car and drove until he ran out of road. Last anyone heard, he'd sold the car and was walking south, toward Mexico, toward anywhere that wasn't here. The hat remained in Arizona. Someone else would find it eventually. Someone else would put it on, would feel the weight of it settle on their head, would hear the humming begin. And then the Taku-He would have new clothes to wear. Epilogue. The Black Hills remain. The pine forests grow thick and dark, hiding secrets that the modern world has forgotten or never knew. Tourists come and go, taking pictures of Mount Rushmore, hiking the trails, camping in the meadows. Sometimes they disappear. A hiker who wandered off the path, a child who chased a butterfly too far from the picnic grounds, a truck driver who stopped for what he thought was a hitchhiker. The search parties find nothing. No bodies, no belongings, no signs of struggle, just tracks, sometimes deep and widely spaced, with claw marks between the toes. And always afterward, the humming. Old folk songs, drifting through the trees, sung in a voice that resonates like it's coming from the bottom of a well. The locals know better than to go looking. They lock their doors at night, keep their dogs inside, tell their children stories about tall men in hats who walk the tree lines, waiting for someone to break the rules. Some legends don't stay dead, they just change clothes. And somewhere in the Black Hills, wearing a coat grown from the skin of its victims and a hat that casts shadows too deep for the sun to penetrate, the Taku-He continues its work, balancing scales that can never be balanced, punishing the guilty and the innocent alike, waiting for the next debt to come due. Humming, always humming. The end. The Howling of Davis Avenue, a Southern Gothic horror novel. Chapter 1, April 1971. The static on the line made it sound like rain, like a storm somewhere far away, though the sky above Mobile had been clear for 3 days. Jimmy Castellanos pressed the receiver harder against his ear, straining to hear through the interference, through the strange rhythmic popping that seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. "Hello," he said again, louder this time. "This is Davis Avenue, Texaco. You called 911. For a moment, nothing. Just the static, the rain noise, the strange sensation that someone was breathing on the other end but not speaking. Then, "She's got claws, man." The voice was male, young, cracking with panic. Jimmy felt ice crystallize in his veins. He'd worked the night shift at this gas station for 4 years, and he'd heard a lot of things over the emergency line. Drunks who'd wrapped their cars around trees, domestic disputes that spilled into parking lots, the occasional tourist who'd locked their keys in the car and didn't know the difference between 911 and roadside assistance. But this. "Claws," Jimmy repeated. "Sir, I need you to calm down and tell me." "Claws and teeth, but she's laughing like a goddamn woman." The voice rose, became a shriek. Behind it, Jimmy heard something else, a sound that made the hair on his arms stand up. Not a scream. Not quite. Something between a howl and a shriek, pitched high and wild, unmistakably inhuman. Then the wet sound of tearing, the spray of liquid hitting something solid. The voice again, but different now, gurgling, choking. "Oh God, oh Jesus, she's..." The line went dead. Jimmy stared at the receiver, his hand shaking. The clock above the register read 2:47 a.m. Outside, the Davis Avenue streetlights cast their sodium yellow glow over empty asphalt. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound except the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the distant whistle of a train. He should call it in. Report the call, give them the number, let the police handle it. That was protocol. But the voice had said Davis Avenue. This Davis Avenue. The gas station where Jimmy stood, surrounded by motor oil and candy bars and the smell of gasoline. Slowly, carefully, Jimmy set down the receiver. He walked to the window, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. The glass was cold against his palm as he pressed his face close, peering out into the darkness. The phone booth stood 20 feet away, illuminated by the station's security light. It was empty, the door hanging open, the receiver dangling from its cord like a severed limb. And on the ground beside it, something dark was spreading. Jimmy didn't go outside. He locked the door, turned the sign to closed, and called the police from the back office. When they arrived 40 minutes later, they found the phone booth empty, the dark stain identified as motor oil from a leaky truck, no sign of any disturbance. But Jimmy knew what he'd heard. He knew the difference between a prank and terror, between imagination and the real, wet sound of something being torn apart. He quit the next day, moved to Pensacola, changed his name, never spoke of that night again. But he heard the howling in his dreams. For the rest of his life, 53 years, he heard it. The laugh that wasn't human, the scream that turned to gurgling, the static that sounded like rain. On the night he died, his nurse heard him mutter something. She leaned close, thinking he was asking for water for his wife, for prayer. "She's got claws," Jimmy whispered. "Claws and teeth, but she's laughing like..." He never finished. His heart stopped at 2:47 a.m., the same time the call had come through, all those years ago. The nurse wrote it off as delirium. She didn't know about Davis Avenue. She didn't know about the wolf woman. But in Mobile, Alabama, on a spring night in 1971, something had awakened. Something that had been waiting since the 1920s, since the drowning, since the moment when a leaner Vester had drawn her last breath and refused to let it be her last. And she was still waiting, still watching, still howling. Chapter 2, Present Day. Myra Cole had built her career on skepticism. At 34, she was the host of Cold Cases, Hot Takes, a true crime podcast that prided itself on debunking myths, exposing hoaxes, and bringing rational analysis to stories that others sensationalized. She'd exposed the Phantom of the Opera as a stagehand with a grudge. She'd proven the Crying Boy paintings were mass-produced kitsch, not cursed objects. She dismantled the legend of the Mothman so thoroughly that even the most dedicated believers had to admit she'd made some solid points. The Wolf Woman of Davis Avenue was her white whale, the story that had started it all. She'd been 12 years old when her grandmother first told her about it. They'd been visiting Mobile for a cousin's wedding, and Grandma Ruth had driven her past the old Texaco station, now converted to a convenience store, and told her about the call, the claws, the thing that wasn't quite wolf and wasn't quite woman. They never found the body, Grandma Ruth had whispered, her eyes wide. Never found the caller, just blood, gallons of blood. Myra had researched it later, expecting to find nothing, expecting another urban legend, another campfire story with no basis in fact. But the records were there. The 911 call, transcribed in police files, the witness statements, the 3 missing persons from that same week in April 1971, never solved, never explained. The sketch, that terrible, beautiful sketch. She'd seen it first in the Mobile Register archives, reproduced in grainy black and white. A woman's face, but wrong, the jaw too long, the teeth too numerous, the eyes yellow and slanted. The artist had captured something that shouldn't exist, something that felt real despite its impossibility. Lena Voss, the sketch artist who'd drawn it. Myra had tried to find her back when she was a grad student, but the trail had gone cold. Lena had left Mobile in 1972, moved somewhere north, disappeared from public records. Now, 20 years later, Myra was finally here. Finally ready to do what she'd promised herself she would do, expose the Wolf Woman as fraud, hysteria, mass delusion. Put the story to rest so thoroughly that no one would ever believe it again. She checked into the Holiday Inn on Airport Boulevard at 3 p.m., the Alabama heat pressing against the windows like a physical force. She'd booked a week. She figured that would be enough time to interview the remaining witnesses, review the police files, and build her case. She was wrong. She would need more than a week. She would need more than courage. She would need to believe in impossible things, and that was something Myra Cole had sworn she would never do. Chapter 3. Earl Dobbs lived in a retirement community on the outskirts of Mobile, a collection of identical duplexes arranged around a central courtyard where the residents played bocce and complained about the heat. Myra found his unit, number 47, painted in peeling beige, and knocked on the door at 10 a.m. sharp, as arranged. The man who answered was not what she'd expected. She prepared herself for a querulous old man, half senile, eager to tell wild stories for attention. Instead, Earl Dobbs was sharp-eyed and alert, his movements precise, his gaze assessing her with the quick professionalism of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading people. "Myra Cole," he said, "it wasn't a question. The podcaster, come to debunk our Wolf Woman." "I prefer to say investigate," Myra replied. "But yes, I'm hoping to bring some clarity to the story." "Clarity?" Earl stepped aside, inviting her in. "That's a funny word for what you're after." The living room was small but tidy, dominated by a recliner positioned in front of a television that was currently off. The walls held framed photographs, Earl in uniform, Earl receiving commendations, Earl standing with men she assumed were fellow officers, and one photograph, larger than the others, showing a younger Earl holding a rifle, standing over something that might have been a wolf or might have been something else. 1971, Earl said, noticing her attention. The night we cornered her. Her, Myra turned to face him. You say that like you believe she was real. Earl settled into his recliner, motioning Myra to a worn sofa. I say it because it's accurate. I don't believe she was real, Ms. Cole. I know she was, because I saw her. I tracked her. I shot her. Shot her? Silver bullets, Earl said, his hand unconsciously moving to his chest, where Myra now noticed a slight bulge beneath his shirt. Custom made, cost me 3 months' salary, and they worked. She went down, she screamed. She disappeared. Disappeared. Into the drainage ditch, into the water. We searched for hours, me and 4 other officers, but we found nothing. No body, no blood, no tracks, just gone. Myra pulled out her recorder. Do you mind if I turn that off? The command was sharp, absolute. Myra hesitated, then complied. Some things ain't meant to be recorded, Earl said, his voice softer now. Some things, you can say them, but once they're on tape, once they're in the system, they get away from you. They start to change, to grow. Mr. Dobbs, I'm here to find the truth, whatever that is. If you really believe you shot a werewolf in 1971, I need to understand why. Earl was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. You think I'm crazy, senile, old cop with too many war stories. I think you've spent 50 years believing something that defies rational explanation. That's worth exploring, even if it turns out to be a delusion. Earl smiled, but there was no humor in it. Let me tell you something, Ms. Cole, I was a good cop. 30 years on the force, never once fired my weapon in the line of duty except that one night. Never once saw anything I couldn't explain. Ghosts, vampires, werewolves. I laughed at all of it. Believed in evidence, in procedure, in the scientific method. And then I saw her. Earl's voice dropped to a whisper. Standing in the drainage ditch on Davis Avenue, knee-deep in water, looking at me. And she was beautiful, Ms. Cole, terrifying and beautiful, like something out of a nightmare and a dream at the same time. Long dark hair, pale skin, and eyes, yellow eyes like a wolf's but with human intelligence behind them. You said she had claws. She raised her hands, showed them to me. Long fingers, normal human except for the nails. They were claws, black, curved like a bear's or a big cat's. She flexed them and I heard them click together. Then she smiled and her teeth, Earl shuddered. Too many, double rows like a shark's, and she laughed. This sound. Not human, not animal, something else. Something that went right through me. What did you do? I ran. First time in my life I ran from anything. Got back to the car, called for backup, told them we had a possible hostile on Davis Avenue. They laughed, thought I was joking. Then the second call came in. The Texaco station. Yeah, Jimmy Castellanos. Poor bastard heard the whole thing. By the time we got there, the phone booth was empty, but there was. Earl's jaw tightened. Evidence. Blood, not a lot, but enough. And claw marks. Deep gouges in the metal of the booth like something had tried to tear it open. But no body. No body, and no Jimmy, not after that night. He moved away, never spoke to us again. But he left a statement, recorded it with the department psychologist, about what he heard, what he saw. What did he see? He wouldn't say, just that it was tall, that it moved wrong, that it was watching him from the trees across the street. Myra leaned forward. Mr. Dobbs, with all due respect, what you're describing could have been a person in a costume, a prank gone wrong, a mental health crisis. There are dozens of rational explanations. You're right, Earl said. There are. I thought of all of them. In the weeks after, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Stress, lack of sleep, maybe a bad reaction to something I ate. The mind plays tricks, especially when you're expecting danger. But then she came back, 3 nights later, same spot, same ditch, and this time, Earl reached into his shirt and pulled out a chain. On it hung a bullet, misshapen, flat, and discolored. This time I was ready. Myra stared at the bullet. Is that silver, pure silver, loaded it myself, Told the boys I was going hunting. They thought I meant deer. Earl laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I wasn't hunting deer. What happened? She came out of the water at sunset, just emerged, like she'd been waiting there all day under the surface, breathing through. I don't know what, she saw me. I know she saw me. And she smiled, that terrible smile. Then she started walking toward me. And you fired. 3 times, hit her twice. Once in the chest, once in the leg. She screamed, God, that scream, and she ran, not away from me, toward the ditch. She dove in, went under, and I swear to you, Ms. Cole, I swear on my mother's grave, she never came up. You searched the ditch. We dragged it, dredged it, found nothing. No body, no blood, no bullet wounds in any animal, just nothing. Myra was quiet for a moment, processing. The story was compelling, she had to admit. Earl told it with the detail of genuine memory, not the rehearsed patter of a fabulist. But it was still impossible, still contradicted everything she knew about the world. Why silver? She finally asked. If you didn't believe in the supernatural, why go to the expense of silver bullets? Earl's expression changed, becoming guarded. Research. After the first sighting, I started reading. Old books, folklore, legends. Every culture has them. Stories about people who turn into animals, animals who turn into people. And in every story there's a weakness. Silver. For werewolves, it's always silver. So you believed. I believed in preparation, Earl corrected. I believed in covering my bases. If it was a person in a costume, regular bullets would work. If it was something else, well, I wanted to be ready. And did it work? You said you hit her twice. She went down, she screamed, she ran, and then, Earl shook his head. And then she was gone, 51 years, and I haven't seen her since. You think you killed her? I think I pissed her off. Earl met Myra's eyes. And I think she's been waiting for someone to come looking, for someone to dig up the past. Is that a warning, Mr. Dobbs? It's a fact. You're here to debunk the wolf woman, to prove she never existed. But what if I told you that by looking, by asking questions, you're waking her up? What if I told you that some things stay quiet only as long as no one remembers them? Myra stood, putting away her notebook. I appreciate your time, Mr. Dobbs, and I respect your conviction. But I'm not going to stop investigating just because of a campfire story. I know, Earl said. That's why I'm telling you, not to stop you, just to prepare you. Prepare me for what? For the moment when you realize you're wrong. Earl leaned back in his recliner, suddenly looking every one of his 82 years. When you see what I saw, when you understand that the world is bigger and older and stranger than your science allows. I'll keep that in mind. You do that, Earl closed his eyes, and Ms. Cole. Yes. Don't go near the drainage ditch after dark, not until the moon changes. The moon. Lunar eclipse in 3 days. That's when she came in 71. That's when I shot her, and that's when she'll come again. Myra left the apartment, stepping out into the Alabama heat. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in the thick air, trying to shake off the unease that Earl's story had planted in her chest. Ridiculous. She was a rational woman, a trained investigator. She didn't believe in werewolves or curses or things that went bump in the night. But as she walked to her rental car, she found herself scanning the tree line, searching the shadows for something tall and pale with yellow eyes. She didn't see anything. Of course she didn't. But when she reached her car, she paused. There on the driver's side door, freshly scratched into the paint, were 3 deep gouges, parallel lines, like claw marks. She touched them with her finger. They were real. The paint was actually scratched, the metal beneath slightly dented. Kids, she muttered, vandals. But she looked around the empty parking lot, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Something that was laughing, just out of earshot. She got in the car and drove away quickly, not looking in the rearview mirror. She should have looked. Chapter 4. Myra photographed the claw marks before going to the police. She told herself it was evidence, documentation for her investigation. She didn't admit, even to herself, that she was stalling, putting off the moment when she would have to acknowledge that something had touched her car, something that left marks that looked exactly like Earl Dobbs had described. The officer who took her report was young, bored, clearly humoring the out-of-town journalist. "Probably kids," he said, not looking up from his clipboard. "We get a lot of vandalism complaints from that lot. Drunk teenagers mostly." "Teenagers with claws?" Myra asked. The officer finally looked at her, something sharp in his gaze. "Ma'am, if you're suggesting something supernatural, I should tell you we've had our fill of that kind of talk. The wolf woman thing is local color, you understand. Brings in tourists, but it's not real. Never was." "What about the 1971 disappearances?" The officer's expression flickered just for a moment, but Myra caught it. Recognition, fear maybe, that was before my time. "But you've heard the stories." "I've heard a lot of stories." The officer closed his clipboard. "We'll file the report. If anything turns up, we'll let you know." He wouldn't let her know. Myra knew that as she walked back to her damaged car. The police had stopped investigating the wolf woman decades ago. It was bad for tourism, bad for property values, bad for the city's image. But someone had scratched her car. Someone with claws or something that looked like claws. And she had a week's worth of investigation ahead of her, starting with the historical records. She drove to the Mobile Public Library, determined to take control of her own narrative. She was here to debunk a myth, not become part of one. Whatever had scratched her car, it was human. Had to be human. The Mobile Register archives were kept in the basement, accessible via a creaking elevator that smelled of dust and old paper. Myra spent the afternoon poring over microfilm, searching for any mention of the wolf woman in the weeks before and after April 1971. She found plenty. The initial sightings, the 911 call, the police investigation, the growing hysteria. Editorials mocking the monster mania, alongside terrified letters from residents demanding action. And then, 3 weeks after the first report, a small article on page 7. "Local artist claims wolf woman sighting. I saw her, and SHE saw me." Lena Voss, the sketch artist. Myra's heart quickened as she read the article, devouring every detail. Lena had been 23 years old in 1971, working for the Register as a police artist. She'd drawn the famous sketch based on witness descriptions, or so the official story claimed. But according to this article, Lena had claimed to have seen the creature herself, standing outside her apartment window watching her, and she hadn't drawn the sketch from descriptions. She'd drawn it from memory. The article was dated April 28, 1971. 5 days later, Lena Voss had left Mobile and never returned. Myra made copies of everything, her mind racing. Lena was the key. If she could find Lena, interview her, get her to admit she'd made the whole thing up, that would be the end of the wolf woman legend. One confession from the source of the sketch, and the entire mythology would crumble. But finding Lena wouldn't be easy. The article mentioned she'd moved to the north, but gave no specific location. Myra would need to dig deeper, check property records, voter registrations, anything that might leave a paper trail. She spent the rest of the day at the library, then drove back to her hotel as the sun set. She was hungry, exhausted, and determined not to think about Earl Dobbs' warning about the drainage ditch. She didn't think about it, not consciously. But as she turned onto Davis Avenue, driving past the spot where the old Texaco station had stood, she found her foot easing off the accelerator. The drainage ditch was visible in her headlights, a concrete channel running parallel to the road, half full of dark water, overgrown with kudzu and weeds. She stopped the car. She didn't know why. She told herself it was curiosity, professional interest, the need to see the scene of the legend for herself. It was something else, something she didn't want to name. She got out of the car, her phone in her hand, using the flashlight to illuminate the ditch. The water was still, reflecting the streetlights above, black and opaque. Something moved in the kudzu on the far bank, a rat, probably, or a cat. Nothing more sinister than that. "Hello," she called, feeling foolish. "Anyone there?" Nothing, just the sound of her own heartbeat, loud in her ears. She was about to get back in the car when she heard it. A sound, faint, distant, but unmistakable. A howl. Not a dog's howl, not a coyote's. Lower, more resonant, with an undertone that sounded almost like laughter. Myra spun around, her light sweeping the tree line. Nothing, just darkness and shadow. She heard it again, closer this time, from the roof of a building across the street. She raised her light, and for just a moment she thought she saw something. A shape, tall, pale, eyes that reflected her light back at her. Then it was gone, if it had ever been there. Myra ran to her car, her heart hammering. She locked the doors, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. She told herself it was a dog, a stray, nothing more. But she didn't sleep that night. She lay in her hotel bed, listening to the sounds of the city, waiting for the howling to start again. It didn't, but somewhere deep in her subconscious, a seed of belief had been planted. Small, fragile, but growing. Chapter 5. The pattern emerged slowly, piece by piece, like a photograph developing in darkroom chemicals. Myra spent the next 3 days in archives and records offices, tracking the 3 missing persons from April 1971. The official files were sparse. Each case had been investigated as a separate incident, with no attempt to link them. But the dates aligned in ways that couldn't be coincidence. April 3, Margaret Holt, age 19, college student. Last seen leaving a bar on Davis Avenue at 11 p.m. Witnesses reported she'd been arguing with a boyfriend and walked off alone. Never seen again. April 7, Thomas Wright, age 45, traveling salesman. Staying at the Davis Avenue Motor Court. Failed to check out. His car was found in the motel parking lot, unlocked, keys in the ignition. His wallet was on the dresser, money untouched. April 12. Ruby Chen, age 62, retired teacher, walking her dog near Davis Avenue Park. The dog returned home alone, leash dragging, collar broken. Ruby never did. 3 disappearances. 9 days, all within a mile of the same drainage ditch. And all, Myra discovered, coinciding with the lunar cycle leading up to the lunar eclipse on April 15, 1971. She cross-referenced the dates with Earl Dobbs' statement. He'd first seen the wolf woman on April 10, shot her on April 14, the night before the eclipse. The eclipse had been partial, covering 78% of the moon's surface. The next partial eclipse over Mobile would be. Myra checked her phone. 3 days from now. Coincidence, she told herself, just coincidence. But she found herself checking the lunar calendar more and more, noting the waxing moon, feeling its pull like a tide. She tracked down Lena Voss on the 4th day. It wasn't easy. The trail was cold, spanning 50 years and multiple states. But Myra was persistent, and eventually she found her. Lena Voss was living in a nursing home in rural Vermont. She was 93 years old, nearly blind, and had been diagnosed with dementia 3 years prior. Myra almost didn't make the call. What could she learn from a woman who might not remember her own name? But she made the call anyway, and when she mentioned Mobile, when she mentioned the sketch, Lena's voice changed. "You shouldn't have called," the old woman whispered. "You shouldn't have said those words. Ms. Voss, I'm investigating the wolf woman story. I need to know, did you really see her, or was the sketch based on witness descriptions?" Silence. Then, "She knows you're asking. She can hear when people speak her name." Ms. Voss. I didn't draw it from descriptions. Lena's voice was stronger now, clearer, as if the memories had pushed back the fog of dementia. I drew it because I saw her, because she stood outside my window and she looked at me and I looked back. When was this? April 1971. 3 nights before the eclipse. She was beautiful, terrifying. She smiled at me and I saw her teeth, too many teeth, and her eyes. Lena's voice broke. Yellow, like an animal, but sad, so sad. What did she want? Justice, vengeance, something that happened long before I was born, something that was done to her. Lena was crying now, soft sobs carrying over the phone line. She showed me, in my dream that night, she showed me what they did to her. What did they do? They drowned her. They accused her of witchcraft and they drowned her in the Mobile River. 1923. She was 29 years old. She clawed her way out of the water, but not before. Not before she changed, became something else, something that wouldn't stay dead. Myra gripped the phone tighter. Ms. Voss, this is important. The eclipse is in 3 days. Do you think she'll come back? She never left, Lena whispered. She's been waiting for someone to remember, for someone to call her back, and now you have. You've said her name, asked her questions, walked where she walks. She knows you now. She'll come for you. For me, why? Because you're investigating, because you want to expose her, and because, Lena's voice dropped to barely audible, because you look like her, like a leaner, same eyes, same hair, same stubbornness. She'll see herself in you, and she'll want to make you understand. Understand what? The howling, the loneliness, the endless hunger for something that can never be satisfied. The line went dead. Not a click, not a disconnection, just silence, empty and absolute. Myra tried calling back, but the nursing home switchboard said Lena Voss had taken a turn for the worse. They were calling her family. They didn't know when she'd be able to take calls again. Myra sat on her hotel bed, the phone still in her hand, feeling the weight of everything she'd learned. Elinor Vester, 1923, drowned for witchcraft, returned as something else. It was a good story, compelling, the kind of narrative that would make a great podcast episode. But it was just a story. It had to be just a story. She checked her email, finding a message from Earl Dobbs. The subject line read simply, "Tonight." The message inside was equally brief. "Come to Davis Avenue at sunset. Bring a recorder. I'll bring the gun." Myra stared at the screen. This was it. The moment when she would either confirm the legend or expose it as a fraud. She would go, she would see, she would know. She packed her equipment, recorder, camera, flashlight, and drove to the meeting place. The sun was setting as she arrived, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Earl was already there, standing by the drainage ditch with a shotgun cradled in his arms. He looked younger somehow, energized, as if preparing for a hunt had shaved years off his age. "You came," he said. "I wasn't sure you would. I need to see for myself." "I know, that's why I'm here." Earl handed her something, a silver necklace, simple with a small pendant. "Put this on." Silver. Protection, not perfect but better than nothing. Myra hesitated, then slipped the necklace over her head. It felt cold against her skin. "The eclipse starts in 2 hours, Earl said. "If she's coming, it'll be then. The peak when the shadow covers the moon, that's when she's strongest, that's when she feeds." Feeds on what? Guilt, fear, the energy of the living. Earl looked at her, his expression grave. "She's not a monster, Miss Cole, not really. She's something else. Something that exists because of what was done to her. A punishment that became permanent. A wrong that can never be righted." Elinor Vester. Earl's eyes widened. "You found the name." "Lena Voss told me before she..." Myra paused. "She got sick." "She didn't get sick. She got warned. The wolf woman doesn't like her story being told, doesn't like being remembered." Earl turned to face the ditch. "But it's too late now. You've said her name, you've walked her path. Tonight she'll come, and you'll see what I saw." They waited. The sun sank lower, the shadows lengthened, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The moon rose, nearly full, its light pale and silvery. Myra checked her watch. 1 hour until the eclipse began. "Tell me about her," she said, needing to fill the silence. "Eleanor, what do you know?" Earl was quiet for a moment. "Not much. After I saw her, I researched. Went to the Historical Society, read old newspapers. In 1923, she was accused of witchcraft by a man named Josiah Crane. Same name as the preacher from Devil's Gulch, probably his son or grandson." "Small world." "Small town," Earl corrected. "Same families, same grudges, generation after generation. Eleanor was a widow. Her husband died in the war. She lived alone, kept to herself, grew herbs in her garden. People thought she was strange. Then Crane's daughter got sick and he blamed Eleanor, said she'd cursed the child. And they drowned her. Mob justice. Dragged her to the river, held her under. She didn't struggle at first, just accepted it. But then she changed. They said her skin rippled like water, her jaw extended, teeth grew, and she started fighting. Clawed 3 men before they got her back under. She drowned. They thought so. Her body floated downstream, disappeared. Never found. But 3 weeks later, Crane's daughter died. And 3 weeks after that, Crane himself was found, torn apart, on the bank of the river, near where they'd held Eleanor under. The wolf woman. That's when the legend started. Earl checked his watch. 30 minutes. Myra turned her recorder on, holding it toward Earl. "For the record, what do you expect to happen tonight?" "I expect her to come, to rise from that ditch, to look at us with those yellow eyes." Earl's hand tightened on his shotgun. "And I expect to have to make a choice." "What choice?" "Whether to shoot her again, whether to try to finish what I started 50 years ago." He turned to face Myra, and she saw tears in his eyes. "Or whether to finally let her rest, to accept that some debts can never be paid, some wrongs can never be righted, to let her have her vengeance if that's what she needs." "You'd let her kill someone." "She won't kill you or me. We're witnesses. We're necessary. She needs people to see her, to remember her, to keep her story alive. But someone else," Earl shook his head, "she's been hungry for a long time." The moon began to darken. The eclipse was starting. "She's here," Earl whispered. "I can feel her." Myra looked at the ditch. The water was still black and opaque, but something was different. The surface was moving, rippling, though there was no wind. And from below she thought she heard humming, a tune she almost recognized, old and sad. "Eleanor," she whispered, "Eleanor Vester." The water exploded upward. A figure emerged, rising from the depths with impossible grace. Tall, pale, long dark hair plastered to a face that was almost human. Almost. The eyes opened, yellow, glowing, filled with intelligence and pain and something that might have been recognition. The mouth opened, too wide, too many teeth, and the sound that came out. Not a howl, not a scream. A name. Myra. The voice was the voice of a woman. The voice of Eleanor Vester, drowned in 1923, transformed by rage and magic into something that defied death itself. "I've been waiting for you," the wolf woman said. "Waiting so long." Myra couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The recorder fell from her hand, forgotten. "They called me a witch," Eleanor said, stepping onto the bank, water streaming from her body. "They were right. I am, but they were guilty too, guilty of cruelty, of murder, of leaving my body to rot in the river while they sang hymns in their churches." I know," Myra managed to say. "I read about what happened." "Then you know I deserve justice." Eleanor was closer now, close enough that Myra could smell her, river water and wet fur and something else, something wild and ancient. "I deserve to be remembered, to be avenged." "How?" Myra asked. "How can I help you?" Alina smiled, that terrible, beautiful smile, by becoming me. She lunged. Earl fired. The silver bullet caught Alina in the shoulder, spinning her around. She screamed, a sound that was wolf and woman and something beyond both, and fell to her knees. Run, Earl shouted. Myra, run. But Myra couldn't run. She was frozen, watching as Alina rose again, the wound already closing, flesh knitting itself together with sickening speed. Silver, Alina said, her voice dripping with contempt. Old tricks. They didn't work in 1971, old man. They won't work now. She turned toward Earl. But I remember you. You hurt me. You made me bleed, and for that. She moved faster than anything human, faster than Myra's eyes could follow. One moment she was kneeling, the next she was on Earl, her claws at his throat, her teeth inches from his face. Wait, Myra screamed. Alina, wait. The wolf woman paused, turned her head. Yes. I can help you. I can tell your story to thousands of people. Millions. They'll know what was done to you. They'll remember. Words, Alina said. Just words. More than words, proof, evidence, the truth. Myra stepped forward, her hands raised. I'm a journalist. I can make sure no one ever forgets Alina Vester, that no one ever forgets what they did to you. And in exchange, let him go, let Earl go. He's just an old man, he doesn't matter. Alina considered this, her yellow eyes narrowing. You offer me fame, legacy, immortality of a kind. I offer you justice, real justice, the kind that lasts. And what do you ask in return? Myra hesitated. She knew what she should say. She knew what would end this here and now. But something else was speaking through her. Something that had been waiting since she'd first heard the story, since she'd first seen the sketch, since she'd first felt the pull of the drainage ditch. Just one thing, she heard herself say. Tell me what it feels like to be free, to be powerful, to never be afraid again. Alina smiled. That, she said, is something I can show you. She released Earl, who fell to the ground, gasping. She turned to Myra, extending her hand. Come, she said, let me show you the howling. Myra took her hand. And the world changed. Chapter 6. The transformation wasn't pain. Myra would remember that later, cling to that single fact like a lifeline. It wasn't pain. It was expansion, unfolding, like a flower blooming in time-lapse, like a map unfolding to reveal territories previously unknown. Alina's hand was cold in hers, the fingers longer than they should be, tipped with claws that didn't cut. The touch was electric, sending sparks up Myra's arm into her chest, spreading through her entire body like wildfire. She felt her bones shift, not break, shift, slide, reconfigure themselves into new architectures. Her jaw extended, teeth multiplying, filling her mouth with rows of sharp edges. Her eyes changed, the color draining from the world, replaced by shades of gray and gold. Everything suddenly sharp, clear, defined by scent and heat as much as by light. And the smells, God, the smells. The world opened up, olfactory landscape expanding from hundreds of scents to thousands, millions, each one distinct and layered. Earl's terror, sour and sharp. Alina's satisfaction, metallic and sweet. Her own sweat, her own blood, her own fear, all transformed now, becoming something else, something wild. Breathe, Alina whispered, and her voice was different now, deeper, resonating in frequencies that human ears couldn't process. Let it happen, don't fight. Myra tried to speak, but her mouth wouldn't form words. She tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't obey. She was changing, had changed, was becoming. She looked at her hands. The fingers were longer, tipped with black claws. The skin was pale, almost luminous in the moonlight, faintly furred along the backs. When she touched her face, she felt the snout, the extended jaw, the too many teeth. What am I? The words came out garbled, distorted, barely recognizable as speech. What you were meant to be, Alina said. What I was meant to be, before they took it from us, before they named us witch and drowned us in rivers. Changed me. Shared my power, my gift. Eleanor's yellow eyes glowed with something that might have been affection. Now you understand, now you know the howling. Myra did understand. She understood that she could run for miles without tiring, that she could smell prey from across the city, that she could hear heartbeats, sense fear, taste lies. She understood that the world was bigger than she'd ever known, full of possibilities she'd never imagined. She also understood that she was terrified. Change me back, she tried to say. Please, I didn't mean, I didn't want. You did want. Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. You asked what it felt like, and you felt it, the freedom, the power, you want it still. I can smell it on you. Myra couldn't deny it. Even through the terror, through the certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake, there was something else. Excitement, hunger, the desire to run, to hunt, to howl at the moon until her throat went raw. This is the curse, Eleanor said. Not the transformation, the desire, the need. Once you've tasted it, you can't go back, not completely. Some part of you will always be waiting for the moon, always listening for the howling. Myra turned to Earl, who was watching them with wide, horrified eyes. He'd crawled backward away from the ditch, his shotgun forgotten. He looked at Myra with recognition and with pity. Myra, he whispered, fight it, don't let her take you. She's not taking anything, Eleanor said. She's choosing, like I chose, like everyone chooses when they understand the truth. What truth? Myra asked. That humanity is a cage, that the body is a prison, that we were meant to be more than flesh and fear. Eleanor looked up at the sky where the eclipse was reaching its peak, the moon half consumed by shadow. They called me witch because I wouldn't stay in my place. Because I healed, I helped, I refused to bow. So they drowned me, but the water didn't kill me. It changed me, made me what I was meant to be all along. A monster. Free, Eleanor's eyes blazed. I am free. I hunt when I want. I eat what I want. I answer to no one. And when the moon is full, when the eclipse comes, I am powerful beyond measure. And the rest of the time, Eleanor's expression flickered. The rest of the time I wait, I remember, I hunger. Myra understood then. The curse wasn't the transformation. It was the waiting. The endless, aching waiting for those brief moments of power, of freedom, of true existence. The eclipse is ending, Eleanor said, turning back to face Myra. You must choose, come with me. Learn to hunt, to howl, to be what you were meant to be, or go back. Live as human, but know that you'll never be free of this. You'll feel the pull every full moon. You'll hear the howling in your dreams. You'll spend your life waiting for the next eclipse. And if I go with you? Then we run. Eleanor smiled, and it was almost human, almost kind. We run until dawn, and then we sleep, and when we wake, we plan. The descendants of Josiah Crane still live in Mobile. They still prosper. They never paid for what their ancestor did. You're talking about revenge. I'm talking about justice. Eleanor's voice hardened. They called me witch. They drowned me. They left me to rot. And their children and their children's children walk free while I hide in drainage ditches. Is that fair? Is that just? Myra thought of her own life. The investigations, the debunkings, the endless search for truth. She'd spent her career exposing lies, revealing the mechanisms behind the magic. And where had it gotten her? Alone, skeptical, perpetually disappointed. But this was real, this was magic, this was transformation. Was it worth the cost? She looked at Earl, old and terrified, his silver bullets useless. She thought of Lena Voss, driven mad by what she'd seen. She thought of Jimmy Castellanos, dead 53 years later, still hearing the howling. No, she said. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. No. No, I won't become your weapon. I won't be part of your revenge. Myra forced her changed body to step backward, away from Eleanor's reach. You're right that they wronged you, but you're wrong to keep hurting people who had nothing to do with it. Innocence is relative. So is guilt. Myra raised her clawed hands, watching the way the moonlight caught on her black nails. You gave me a gift, Alina, power, freedom, but I won't use it to hurt others. That's not freedom. That's just another cage. Alina stared at her, and for a moment Myra saw something in those yellow eyes. Surprise, maybe even respect. You're stronger than I was, Alina said. I accepted the gift because I wanted revenge. You accept the burden because you want justice. Different paths. Can you change me back? No, Alina shook her head. The transformation is permanent, but you can learn control. You can learn to be human most of the time, wolf only when you choose. Teach me. And in exchange, I tell your story, the real story. Alina Vester drowned for witchcraft in 1923. I make sure the world remembers. And I make sure Josiah Crane's descendants pay, not with blood, but with knowledge, with shame, with the truth. Alina considered this, her head tilted like a curious animal. Words, she said, just words. Words are powerful, Myra said. You taught me that. The eclipse was passing. The shadow receded from the moon, revealing its full silver light, and with it the power began to fade. Myra felt her bones shifting again, sliding back into human configuration, the fur receding, the claws retracting. The change is temporary, Alina said. During the eclipse, but now that it's done once, it will happen again, every full moon. You'll learn control or you'll lose yourself. I understand. No, Alina said. You don't, not yet, but you will. She turned, walking back toward the drainage ditch. Come back on the next eclipse. I'll be here. And if you've kept your word, if you've told my story, I'll teach you what you need to know. Alina. One more thing. The wolf woman paused at the water's edge. The old man, he's seen too much. He'll talk. He'll try to stop you. You should kill him. I won't. Alina shrugged. Then hide, disappear, because when the sun rises the hunt begins. Not by me, by them, the ones who know, the ones who have been waiting for proof. Proof of what? That we're real. Alina smiled, and then she was gone, slipping into the water without a sound, leaving only ripples to mark her passage. Myra stood alone by the ditch, human once more, her clothes torn and stained. Earl was gone too, she realized, fled while they talked, taking his shotgun and his silver bullets and his 50 years of secrets. She looked at the sky, at the fully revealed moon, at the stars that suddenly seemed closer, more real. She touched her face, her teeth, her eyes. Human, for now. But something had changed, something fundamental. She could feel it in her blood, in her bones, in the part of her mind that was already listening for the howling. She walked back to her car slowly, feeling each step, each breath. She was alive in a way she hadn't been before, every sense heightened, every nerve exposed. She drove back to her hotel, avoiding the mirror, afraid of what she might see. Chapter 7. The next 3 days were a blur of activity and avoidance. Myra checked out of the Holiday Inn, found a new hotel under a false name, and spent her days in the library, researching, writing, recording. She called her producer, told him she had the story of a lifetime, something that would change everything. He didn't believe her. He thought she was having a breakdown. He suggested she come home, see a doctor. She hung up on him. She spent her nights walking the city, testing her new senses. She could smell fear from a block away. She could hear whispers through walls. She could run for miles without tiring, her body moving with an efficiency that felt alien and natural at the same time. The full moon was a week away. She was already feeling the pull, the building pressure, the desire to change. She tried to find Earl, but he disappeared. His apartment was empty, his belongings gone. The nursing staff said he'd left in the night, checking himself out against medical advice. No one knew where he'd gone. She tried to find information about Josiah Crane's descendants. There were 3 living in Mobile, a lawyer, a real estate developer, and a preacher at the First Baptist Church. She photographed them, recorded their routines, built a file. Not for violence, for exposure, for truth. On the fourth day, she returned to Davis Avenue at noon, when the sun was high and the ditch was just a ditch, full of muddy water and trash. She stood where she'd stood with a leaner, trying to recapture the feeling, the transformation, the power. "You're here." She turned. Earl emerged from behind an abandoned building, older than she remembered, leaning heavily on a cane. He looked at her with eyes that saw too much. "You changed," he said. "It wasn't a question." "She shared something with me, power, knowledge." "A curse." "Maybe." Myra stepped closer. "You tried to shoot her, you tried to kill me." "I was trying to save you, save us both." Earl's hand tightened on his cane. "You don't understand what you've become, what she made you." "I understand more than I did before. I understand that the world is bigger than I thought, that there are things that can't be explained by science or reason." "Dangerous things." "All things are dangerous." Myra met his eyes. "What are you going to do, try to kill me too?" "I can't kill you, I don't have enough silver, and anyway," Earl's voice broke. "You're still in there, still human, still Myra, I can see it. I'm both now, human and other." "Then choose." Earl stepped forward close enough to touch. "Choose to be human, fight the change, lock yourself away during the full moon, don't let her win." "She didn't win, I made a deal. I tell her story and she teaches me control." "There's no control, there's only hunger." Earl's eyes were wet. "I know, I've seen it. The ones who try to resist, they suffer. The ones who give in, they become monsters." "And what's the third option?" "There isn't one." "Then I'll create one." Myra turned away. "I'm going to finish my story. The truth about Eleanor Vester, about Josiah Crane, about what happened in 1923. And then I'm going to find a way to live with what I've become, not as a monster, not as a victim, as something new." "You're deluding yourself." "Maybe, but it's my delusion, my choice." She started walking away. "Go home, Earl, find a place to rest. You've been fighting this too long." "I can't rest, not while she's out there, not while you're what you are." "Then keep fighting, but don't expect me to be your enemy. I'm not a leaner. I won't hunt the innocent." "You say that now." Myra turned back just for a moment. "I say that always." She walked away, feeling his eyes on her back, feeling the weight of his disappointment and his fear. She didn't blame him. She would have felt the same a week ago. Before. Chapter 8. She published the podcast 2 days later. The Howling of Davis Avenue, a true story. She told everything, Eleanor's drowning, the curse, the transformation, her own experience. She named names. She provided evidence. She made the impossible sound inevitable. The response was immediate and explosive. The podcast went viral within hours, downloaded millions of times, discussed on every platform. Skeptics called it fiction, performance art, a hoax. Believers called it proof, validation, the truth they'd been waiting for. The 3 descendants of Josiah Crane sued her for defamation. Their lawyers sent cease and desist letters. The preacher gave a sermon about the dangers of false prophecy. Myra didn't care. She'd kept her promise. Eleanor's story was told, the truth was out. On the night of the full moon, she locked herself in a storage unit, chained herself to the wall, and waited. The change came like a wave, like a storm, like possession. She screamed. She tore at her chains. She howled until her throat was raw. And then somehow she remembered herself. Remembered who she was, what she wanted, what she'd promised. She didn't break free. She didn't hunt. She waited out the night, human in mind if not in body, until dawn brought the change back. She was exhausted, bruised, hungry beyond belief, but she was still herself. Earl found her the next morning, collapsed outside the storage unit, barely conscious. He took her to his new apartment, a small place on the outskirts of the city, and nursed her back to health. "You resisted," he said, wonder in his voice. "Barely." "But you did it, you're not lost." Not yet. Myra sat up, accepting the water he offered. I need to learn more control, more understanding. Alinar can teach you. I know, that's why I'm going back. She'll try to turn you, to make you like her. Maybe, or maybe she's just lonely. Maybe she wants someone to understand her, someone who doesn't fear her. Earl was silent for a long time. I've spent my whole life fearing her, hating her, trying to destroy her, but maybe you're right, maybe she's just lonely. She was human once. Myra stood, testing her strength. She still is, somewhere inside, the woman who was drowned for helping people, who just wanted to live her life. She's killed people. So have humans, in the name of justice, in the name of God, in the name of nothing at all. Myra met his eyes. I'm not saying she's innocent. I'm saying she's not just a monster. And what about you? Are you a monster? Myra looked at her hands, still scarred from the chains. I'm something else, something new, and I need to figure out what that means. She left Earl's apartment and drove to Davis Avenue. The drainage ditch was different in daylight, just a ditch, just water, just concrete and weeds. But she knew what was beneath the surface, what waited. Alinar, she called, I kept my word. The water rippled. The wolf woman emerged, slowly, gracefully, her pale form shimmering in the sunlight. I heard, Alinar said. The whole world heard. I'm famous now. Infamous. Same difference. Alinar smiled, and it was almost friendly. You resisted the change. I'm impressed. Barely. I need to learn more. And in exchange, I keep telling your story to everyone who will listen, until the name Alinar Vester is as well known as any historical figure, until Josiah Crane's legacy is nothing but shame. That's a lot of work for one person. I'm not one person anymore. I'm two, human and whatever this is. Wolf, Alinar said. You're wolf now, or will be once you learn to embrace it. Teach me. Alinar considered this, her yellow eyes unreadable. There are others, she finally said. Others like us, scattered, hidden. We could find them, build something. A pack. A family. Alinar's voice softened. I've been alone for 100 years. It's not good for the mind. Then let's not be alone. Alinar extended her hand. This time, Myra took it without hesitation. The touch wasn't transformative. It was just a hand, cold and strange, holding hers. But it meant something. Connection. Understanding. The beginning of something neither of them could name. Come, Alinar said. The night is young. Let me show you how to hunt. I won't hurt people. I know we'll hunt deer, rabbits. The forest is full of prey. Myra hesitated, and after we talk, we plan. We decide what kind of monsters we want to be. Not monsters. No, Alinar agreed. Not monsters, something else. They walked together into the woods, away from Davis Avenue, away from Mobile, away from the world of humans and their fears. Behind them, the ditch was just a ditch. Ahead of them, the forest was dark and full of possibility. Epilogue. 6 months later, Myra Cole published her final podcast episode, The Howling of Davis Avenue, What Comes After. She told the truth as she knew it. The transformation, the choice, the ongoing struggle. She explained that Alinar Vester had been a victim, not a villain, and that the cycle of fear and violence could only be broken through understanding. She didn't mention that she now spent her full moons in the woods, running on 4 legs, hunting alongside Alinar and 3 others they'd found. A college student from New Orleans, a librarian from Atlanta, a truck driver who'd picked up the wrong hitchhiker in Texas. She didn't mention that she'd learned to control the change, to be human when she chose and wolf when she needed, that she'd developed a taste for venison and a distaste for crowds. She didn't mention that Earl Dobbs had become their ally, their guardian, the one who covered their tracks and kept their secrets and reminded them of their humanity when the wolf grew too strong. She didn't mention that the descendants of Josiah Crane had quietly left Mobile, one by one, unable to bear the scrutiny, the shame, the weight of their ancestors' sins. She didn't mention that on certain nights, when the moon was right and the wind was still, she could hear howling that wasn't her own, that wasn't Alina's, coming from somewhere deep in the wilderness. Other wolves, other packs, other stories waiting to be told. The podcast ended with a simple statement. The world is bigger than we know. Magic is real. Transformation is possible. And sometimes the monsters are just people who were hurt so badly they became something else to survive. The downloads numbered in the tens of millions. The comments ranged from awe to mockery to terrified belief. Myra didn't read them. She was too busy living. On the anniversary of her first transformation, she stood at the edge of Davis Avenue drainage ditch with Alina, watching the water flow. "Do you regret it?" Alina asked, "becoming like me?" "I regret that it had to happen," Myra said. "I regret what was done to you. I regret that the world is cruel enough to create monsters. But not being what you are." "No," Myra smiled, and her teeth were slightly too sharp, her eyes slightly too yellow. "I don't regret that at all." Alina laughed, the sound wild and free. "Then let's run." They changed together, two wolves where two women had stood, and they ran into the night, howling at the moon, free at last. Somewhere in a nursing home in Vermont, Lena Voss heard the howling in her dreams and smiled. She'd been right. They were real. They were free. And they were not alone. The end. Thank you for listening to tonight's stories. If you enjoyed them, please leave a like and subscribe.